Hello and welcome back to Fighting on Film. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the release of Oliver Stone's seminal Vietnam War film, Platoon. And we are thrilled to be joined on the show once again by legendary military advisor Captain Dale Dye. Dale was instrumental in bringing a gritty, authentic feel to Platoon and has since worked on some of the best war films and TV series made in the last 40 years, including Saving Private Ryan, Rough Riders, Last of the Mohicans, Forrest Gump, Band of Brothers, The Pacific, Greyhound, and Masters of the Air, to name but a few. Dale, it's wonderful to have you back on the show.
Well, thanks, guys. It's great to be back. I'm always happy to talk about the film that really kickstarted my career.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to jump into it, isn't it? I mean, my first question for you, Dale, is how did you get involved in Platoon, and had you met Oliver Stone before you actually got involved with the project?
No, I really hadn't met him at all. I'd read about him. This story's become apocryphal, I guess, but let me repeat it for you. I was out in Los Angeles, home of motion pictures and television at the time, in the early '80s, and wanted to find a way to implement my theories about what was wrong with war movies and how to make them better and all that sort of thing. And I was really butting up against a brick wall. I couldn't get anybody to listen to me. I mean, they'd made war movies for years and made zillions of dollars, and they didn't
Hmm.
need some clown like me coming out of left field with no movie experience and going to tell them how to build a better mousetrap. So I'd been out there about just short of a year, and I was about to give up. I thought, I'll go be a cop on somebody's small town police force, or be a cubicle rat in the defense industry somewhere. But that was unappealing, to say the most. Um, so what I had done was I'd learned to read the trade papers. I'd learned to read Variety and Daily Variety and the showbiz media. And I had discovered, actually by accident, that there was a small notice in a gossip column, essentially, that said that a heretofore relatively unknown writer-director by the name of Oliver Stone was going to do a Vietnam War film based on his own personal experience as a combat infantryman in Vietnam. And I said, "Oh my God, here it is. If I can ever get in front of this guy, he'll get what I'm trying to say. He'll understand what the problems are, and so on and so forth." So I was desperate to get a meeting with this guy. And through some machinations that I probably shouldn't tell you about because the statute of limitations may not have run out yet, I was able to get a couple of minutes with Oliver in a cutting room down on Sunset Boulevard, where he was cutting his first feature film called Salvador. And I marched in there head high and said, "Listen, you know what's wrong with war films, and I know what's wrong with war films, and I know how to fix it. And what you need to do is give me some money and let me go unscrew this stuff." And well, that was not my best presentation, but it occurred to me that Oliver was listening. He kind of agreed with, in the midst of cutting a film, he kind of agreed with what I was telling him. But I didn't get much reaction. So I walked out of there thinking, well, I've just screwed the pooch here, and that's the end of me. I might as well get a ticket back to the Midwest. And lo and behold, the next day, I got a call from his producer who said, "Listen, Oliver wants to talk to you. He wants to expand this conversation." And I said, "Oh, here's a shot." So we had another meeting, a subsequent meeting, a long one. And he agreed with my theories about what was wrong with war films. Most importantly, he agreed that they needed to be fixed with proper preparation. And that preparation should model what he and I went through in our military experience. So the upshot was that we made a deal, and he gave me 33 actors in 3 weeks. We were going to the Philippines, and I had this crew of young, relatively unknown actors at the time: Willem Dafoe, Charlie Sheen, Forrest Whitaker, John McGinley, and on and on and on. Um, Tom Berenger and Charlie Sheen. And I said, okay, how am I going to do this? And what I did was I fell back on my military experience. I created a training model, a training schedule, essentially, as I would have done with a young bunch of recruits in the military. And all I demanded was, look, leave me alone. Don't send agents or anybody else. I want to absolutely isolate these guys and work on their minds, their hearts, and their emotions. And if you let me do that, I promise I will deliver to you a group of guys who resemble you and I when we first went into the military and we first arrived in Vietnam. And they will have an understanding of how we think, how we communicate, what our emotions are. They'll have experience so that when you ask them to portray something that you've written in your script, they'll have an understanding of what that means. And that was the key.
Mm.
So, in essence, it occurred to me the other day when I was watching Platoon again for the nth time. It occurred to me that the process that you take on Platoon and have taken with many other films, since then, is that you're almost instilling sort of like a communal method acting on them, whether they kind of like appreciate that at the time or not.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I've been humorously called Captain Stanislavski, for the method that I employ. Um, and I guess that's true. Look, I'm interested in recreating a world um, that gives them a launching pad, a place to use their talents, to understand how they can apply their talents. To do that, I have to create a world that
Mm.
is foreign and different. And I do that, and I adhere assiduously and religiously to that throughout the training. I lose their names. I don't care who they are. They call themselves only as their cast names. They function every day in the capacity that I'm training them for. And what I find is because actors have vivid imaginations, they have to have, is that if I apply that and apply it continuously and rigorously and regularly, what happens is they get into the world. It
Mm.
becomes their new world. And that makes it so much easier for them to interpret anything the script asks them for. They get it. They get
Mm.
it what it is, why it is, and how it is. And I guess in writ large, that's kind of what I do.
Mm. I was going to ask, did any of the actors have any prior knowledge of doing anything similar to what you did with them? And because I know that obviously Charlie Sheen's dad, Martin Sheen, was in Apocalypse Now. I wonder if he had any prior knowledge to this going in, or was it quite new to everybody?
I think it was new. Um, I think there was a suspicion that they would be given some sort of elementary, how do you load a weapon, where do you point it, how do you wear your
Mm.
uniform, and that sort of thing. But I don't think, in fact, I know from years of talking to them after the fact that none of them expected what was going to happen. I mean, I literally created that world. I issued them a warning order telling them what was expected and how this was going to be serious business. And if they didn't want to be serious business, find another job. In fact, Oliver told me, I guess a couple of years after the film came out to such rave reviews, that I think he said three of the actors that he had wanted to cast caught wind of this, that this was going to happen. And they said, no, thank you, Oliver. And he lost three actors.
Right.
Wow.
Um, yeah, he was a little bit pissed off about that, but later, once we succeeded, I don't think I think all that went away.
Mm. I think I seem to recall Ben Stiller saying that he really regretted not being a part of it. I think he
Yeah,
tried to
yeah.
get on board at one point. Yeah. Matt, I think we have a first Patreon question, do you think?
Yeah, so we have our first Patreon question, and this one is from Paul Hicks. He asks, how quickly did the actors switch on to the rigors of boot camp? And did any of them have any pushback, or did they recognize what was trying to be achieved?
Well, I think the answer is, and thanks for the question, by the way, to your viewer. Um, the answer is they had the same sort of pushback that anybody would have, as any military recruit would have, when he's taken out of his comfortable environment and pushed up
Mm.
way out into an uncomfortable zone. So yeah, they were contagiously shocked at what I demanded of them. Um, was there ever any push to leave or to quit? No, there wasn't. I think they knew that they were isolated. They were in the jungle. They were living in a hole with some crazy white-haired guy that was wanting to kill them. And I think the overall realization very quickly was the best way to get through this is to do what the hell he says and behave ourselves and get this done. And that was the initial reaction. Now, as the unit began to build, and as that solidarity and that comradeship and that reliance on each other built, um, all of that disappeared. They became a unit, and that was the goal.
Hmm. So what kind of things are you putting these guys through then? You've got your raw actors, and what's the first thing you're sort of putting them through?
Well, I think the idea is I reduce them to the lowest common denominator. And in order to do that, I've got to shake out a lot of hubris, a lot of self-centered attitudes. And look, actors grow up that way. It's all about me, 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 and how many lines do I have on this page, and how's my hair? That's the antithesis of the way a military guy thinks. He thinks of the unit and the mission first, and then himself. Uh, so I had to reduce that. And the way I do that essentially is to uh, institute a system of mind over matter. I don't mind and they don't matter. And quickly, what happens is they realize they're all in this together. They're all being harassed and they're all being physically pushed. Um, and all of that. I'm a movie star. I've got this. I've worked with this director. I've that all goes away. They promptly forget that, and they need to forget it. I don't allow the words movie to be used whatsoever, or actor, or anything else. It's the mission, the project, the unit, and that's what I want them to think about. Now, that said, once a day, usually around chow time, and they eat twice a day if they haven't pissed me off that day, which they only eat once. Um, I have what's called a stand down, and that has become um, really one of the primary examples of how we do things. Usually around chow time, I would take an hour and I'd say, gents, the following attends. You have 1 hour to ask me anything that's been on your mind, anything. And I will try to answer that question and I will stay with it until you're satisfied with the answer. And that's really, I didn't know it at the time, but it has now become one of the most valuable portions of all my training. It's that chance to ask when there's no time for it during the training day. It's that chance to take off their pack for a minute and ask me things like, how do you take a dump in the field? How does it feel to be hit with morphine? What happens when you get hit with shrapnel, and what does it mean? And all those nit-noy questions have been nagging at them. And what happens is, if I stay with that question and answer from my own experience, you can see the light bulb go on. You can see the light come on behind their eyes. So that's a very valuable part of the training day,
Mm.
but only once and only for a limited amount of time. And then they jump right back into who they are and what they are.
Yeah,
That's
that's
fascinating.
fascinating process. Yeah.
At this point, Dale, had you set up Warriors Inc., or was it that something you've sort of like set up afterwards? Obviously, you had a team with you in the Philippines when you were
Yeah,
doing Platoon.
it was. I really didn't expect to be as successful as I was. Um, and once I got this job and I needed people to help me and that sort of thing, so I started thinking, maybe this might have legs. Maybe this might work. And so, as a sort of a cautionary move, I established Warriors Incorporated, which is now morphed after 30 some years into Warriors Global because we work all around the world. Um, but at the time, I was unsure. I talked to some lawyers who said, listen, you may become a showbiz big deal. I said, yeah, maybe. No, you need to be incorporated. And so I paid them a lot of money and signed a bunch of papers, but I forgot about it until the success of Platoon, when suddenly it was important to be the go-to entity.
Mm. Do you remember your fee from that? I wondered what you would have charged for it because in this
I,
period there just isn't a thing like that
Yeah,
yet.
no one's done it before, have they?
No
So
one's done it
how do you
before.
come up with like a fee for that? I mean,
I'm,
obviously you
I'm
don't have to
afraid
answer that
I'm
if you don't
afraid
want
to
to.
tell you um, because it was so ridiculously low that I had no idea what I was planning to do was worth.
Mm.
And thank goodness it's multiplied many times. I've made a
Yeah.
pot full of money. Um, but at the time, it was like $500 a week,
Okay.
um, and
Wow.
and and put me up in give me a bunker somewhere and let me sleep in it, and that was it. I had
Mm.
no idea
No.
coming out of the military. I mean, I wasn't making any money anyway, so that seemed like a big deal to me.
Mm.
It later when we began to win Academy Awards and a lot of attention was dumped on me. And so people would ask me that and they say, well, listen, hey, how much did you charge? And I'd tell them and they'd say, you idiot, listen. And so the price escalated to the point where it's atmospheric now.
Did you set off to obviously the character you play, the captain character,
Mhm.
was that a thing already in the script, or did that come later when you've shown what you're doing and stuff?
It was a surprise to me anyway. Um, Oliver Stone, he'd never mentioned it. In fact, I was looking forward to training whoever was going to be Captain Harris, the commanding officer. And Oliver came to me one day about 2 weeks into the filming, I guess, and he said, "Listen, I want you to be Captain Harris." And I said, "Well, I am. I've trained your people, and they look to me as their leader." And he said, "No, no, no. I'm talking about on camera. How about we got to get some shoe polish and dye your hair?" And I said, well, hell, I guess so, I'm not an actor. He said, "Oh, yes, you are.
Mm.
I've watched you. I know what you're doing." He said, "What I want you to do on camera is exactly what you've been doing with these troops. I want you to be that guy." I said, "Well, hell, that's not too much of a stretch. I guess I am that guy."
Mm.
And so I was nervous as hell about it. And the first scene I was in was with Mark Moses, Willem Dafoe, and Tom Berenger. And I was telling them if I find out there was an illegal killing, there's going to be a court martial and all that sort of thing. And I was about to crap myself. I mean, I had no idea, I was trying to see where the cameras were. And Tom Berenger, God bless him, took me aside and he said, "Skipper, listen, never mind all that. Just focus on us and do what you would do as a company commander if we pissed you off." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes. Just look in our eyes, look in our faces, and never mind all the crap that's going on around us. Be in the scene." He said, "You should know something about that. given what you put us through. And I said, okay, I got it. And he sort of saved the bacon. And what I found out was I'm good at this. Once I saw the dailies and I said, damn, that's pretty impressive. So at that point, I guess the acting fire kind of got lit under my tail, and
Mm.
I decided I could do this. I'm to this day, I'm probably the most typecast guy in Hollywood. Um, Me and Lee Ermey, God bless him, until he
Yeah.
died, we were the two go-to guys for any military
Mm.
movies.
So there's the sequence of at the end when you're calling in that airstrike.
Yeah,
It's for me and Matt, it's one of the greatest moments because it's you, but
yeah,
it's the franticness of it, and you're just standing up with your radio, telling the guy like you stay in place and you fight. You know, there's
yeah.
such a realism to that, and that there's a line that you say. When you're calling in for the airstrike, and you go, and at the end you go, it's a lovely fucking war. Did you have any input into that dialogue, or was that scripted?
Listen, it was scripted, um, but the way I said it was really Oliver gave me the option, and he said, "Look, I just say it," and we did it. We did it several ways. We said it without the fucking, and we said it several ways. And Oliver finally just said, "Hey, listen, never mind all that. Just say it the way you would say it." It was one of those moments when you depart reality and your mind goes someplace else. And I just said, it's a
Mm.
lovely fucking war, and it just came out that way. And that's the way he cut it, and that's the way he played it.
It's a
It's an
great,
iconic scene. It
it's a
really,
great scene.
it is. It really is. I mean, obviously, your role with Platoon is known off screen for the boot camp sort of thing, but obviously that kind of expands past the boot camp as well. Because while the film was being made, I'm sure you had a great deal of input in all kinds of different things. What was it? An average day on set? Are you helping to choreograph like firefights? Are you giving people advice on, how they should be moving, what they should be doing, where things should be in a scene, that kind of thing? What kind of inputs did you have
Well,
during the actual
I was
filming?
always at Oliver's elbow, and he wanted
Mm.
me there. Um, I didn't have that much staging problem simply because they had been trained and they knew exactly what to do. They knew how to load their weapons and how to clear them if they had a jam and all that sort of thing. So it was an easy thing. But Oliver wanted me to be the critical eye on everything that was going on. If we is something happening in the background that I'm not watching, and always tell me about it. And it got to be to the point where I would sit next to him with a loaded M16 with blanks in it. And if the scene was dying, I'd just crank off a couple of rounds up in there and everybody get excited again. So I
Wow.
moved the juice level up a bit. In fact, there was one instance, and I was working. I had to literally make some of the props, the Starlight scope and all that. So I
Oh
literally made
wow,
that out of a
Wow.
couple of toilet paper rolls and tape and a few other things because
that's cool.
we just didn't have the money and we didn't
Mm.
have the availability of some of those things. So I was constantly doing that sort of thing, and it was 14, 16 hours a day, and it wore me out. So I remember an instance. This will demonstrate kind of what my role was as we rolled into the filming. I was sitting there, and typically I was right next to Oliver, who was right next to the primary camera with Bob Richardson behind it, the DP. And I was sitting on an ammo box with a loaded M16 there, and we were shooting the scene in which we'd fogged the jungle, and a couple of North Vietnamese Army troopers come through, and it's a
Yeah, the
patrol,
first
a
ambush.
night
Mm.
ambush,
Mm.
and it was a night shoot, and I'd been up about 18 hours. And I sat there while all this was going on, and I fell asleep. I fell asleep on the rifle, and Oliver had the action going, and by the time I woke up and looked up, and here were these two NVA coming through the fog, and I immediately snapped the rifle up to my shoulder, and I was going to blow them away. And Oliver saw me, and he reached over and pushed the rifle down, and I woke up because I was literally back in
Yeah.
the jungle, um,
Wow.
just coming out of that sleep fog, and that
Mm.
happened a lot. It happened in particular. I may be jumping ahead of you here, but I'll
No, no.
continue to roll. Um, it happened once during the village scene where we had recruited a lot of actual Vietnamese from the refugee population in Manila.
Hmm.
And we brought them up to populate this village scene. And Oliver and I were milling around, arranging things. And all around us was this tonal gabble of Vietnamese language. And it got to me. It just suddenly I was transported back to Vietnam. And I had to walk off the set. I mean, and I walked away and went out and sat on a rice paddy dike. And I just, come on, wake up. You're not in Vietnam anymore. You're in this movie making in the Philippines. And I was trying to talk to myself that way. And I just couldn't go back and face it, that particular instance. And
Mm.
suddenly there's a shadow over me. And I looked around and it was Stone. And he didn't say a word. He just sat down next to me and shook his head. And I knew right then that he had experienced exactly the same
Same
thing.
thing. Mm.
And I think that was the moment that he and I became pals as well
Mm.
as cohorts and colleagues. We became friends there, and he knew what I was going through, and I knew what he was going through, and it was all the language that was hitting our ears, and suddenly, after all we'd been through, we were we were back in Vietnam. So that sort of thing happened throughout our filming. Um, he and I would often we'd stage something that was so brutally real that we'd look at each other and just shake our heads and say, "Yeah, that was it." Um, so we cross-checked each other throughout, and that really became part of the success of the film, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's that the grittiness, that realism to it that people always come back to.
Mm.
Um, so I think there's another Patreon question time. This is from James McNeil, and he asks, "What, if anything, would you have changed or improved upon with the benefit of hindsight?"
Look, I probably would have done a little more prep.
Okay.
Uh, when we arrived in the Philippines, we were in the middle of a rebellion. The Marcos regime was being overthrown, um, and I had no idea. I didn't know whether we were going to be able to go ahead with this film or what the hell was going on. And I hadn't done enough shopping. I hadn't been over there to make sure that we had all the gear we needed, and hence I had to manufacture some of them at whole cloth. Um, and now I do those things automatically because I've been caught short on things like Platoon. Um, so I think I would have done a little more on-site prep. Um, I sure as hell would have charged a lot more money. Uh, but I think the good thing about Platoon was that it demonstrated that my method, which has sort of grown and been modified over the years and over the projects, was workable and in fact was very effective. So I don't know particularly what I would have changed in broad strokes, probably nothing.
Mm.
Um, I think it was proof of performance.
Mm, mm.
So as you mentioned there, what sort of things did you take from Platoon and then expand on when you worked on, films down the line?
Practically everything.
Mm.
Once I was convinced not only by effectiveness, but audience acceptance and showbiz acceptance. Look, when I was trying to sell this idea, this concept, everybody said, "Well, we don't need that. It's nonsense. It's why it's called acting. Come on, we don't need a dose of reality like that." When Platoon succeeded phenomenally as it did, suddenly all those naysayers, all those people who said we don't need this, now said, "Oh hell yes, we need this." So I think that, as I said, was proof of concept, and it allowed me to say this works, this didn't, this works, but it needs to be modified in this fashion. Um, I I need to expand standown. I need to work more on the psychology of the actors, on their emotions. I need to be able to touch those things. I need to be able to find ways to do that more effectively. And all of that's been a growth project.
Mm. Did you obviously because you do Platoon and then Full Metal Jacket comes out, and then I think later you work on Casualties of War as well
Yeah,
with
I
Sean
did.
Penn.
Yeah.
How did you find that glut of Vietnam movies that came after? Did you think that they were in the same vein as Platoon, or do you think they were something different, or was it different to work on that to Platoon?
Well, look, Vietnam was a different war. It depended, it went on for 10 years.
Hmm.
And if you were in the army in the Mekong Delta, you fought a different war than a Marine up on the demilitarized zone did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were millions of stories that were available to be told. Um, I was very often asked to work on films about Vietnam where the Americans didn't come off so well.
Hmm.
The American military didn't come off so well. Casualty to War is a classic example.
Yeah.
Uh, and I fought with myself for a while and my growing staff. I began to talk about this. And I said, look, guys, we're here to shine some long overdue light on the American military. Um, the fact of the matter is that not all of that light is pleasant. Not all of that light is what the military would like to think it is. So, look, should we walk away from those kind of films? Or should we take part in them? And should we go for the truth, go for the reality? Um, because I think if we can shine that light on who American soldiers are, warts and all, that it serves the public and it serves the image. I've had arguments about that throughout my career, but I still believe the truth is better than any fiction we can come up with.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a really with all those movies, they contrast each other really well.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
way that Full Metal Jacket is the way that me and Matt think Platoon and Hamburger Hill have a lot in common because they show
mhm,
ground combat in a very visceral way, whereas Casualties of War, it's showing that sort of grimness to things that can happen. So
yeah.
I think there's a real good dichotomy through those movies.
Yeah, and I think that dichotomy is important. Um, it'd be nice if all military operations and all wars were cut and dried and
Hmm,
the good guys were clear and the bad guys were clear, but it's never that way.
no.
And and to understand it and support it, you have to understand that. You have to understand that it's not a pretty picture.
Mm, yeah, and Platoon certainly doesn't shy away from showing you that either. Matt, I think another Patreon question, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. This is an interesting one. It kind of loops us back round to the boot camp sort of aspect. Andrew Brown asks, firstly, he asks, what was downtime like in Vietnam? But then he also asks what kind of music was played and how does it differ from what they, kind of use in films? And then,
Well,
I
look,
mean,
go
go on,
ahead.
sorry.
Do you have the rest of the
Yeah,
question? Or?
just the touch. And then something that I thought of that came out of this was, did you try and emulate some of that downtime during the boot camp phase?
No. I didn't have time for that.
Mm,
Only at the end of the training, when I threw a big beer bash for them, did we emulate that sort of downtime. But I did emphasize to them that downtime was a significant part of your combat experience.
mm,
Um, you were desperate for that respite from the tension out in the jungle and that sort of thing. And so you
yeah.
tended to get as intoxicated and out of control as you could as a sort of escape mechanism. I told them about it, and I emphasized it. But part of the question that intrigues me, and I want to expand on this a little bit, is music. Look, we were in the rock and roll generation, and back in Vietnam, the beginning of the rock and roll
Hmm.
generation. Music was a big part of our downtime. If it might be music was presented on the military network overseas, the Armed Forces Vietnam network, or it might be tapes or something that was sent from home. But music was a big magic carpet, kind of took you away from the concerns of what was going to maybe happen in the next 24 hours. So music became a big deal. Um, and I didn't miss that. It I twigged to it very quickly. And later on, in several projects, we incorporated it in the training. So that during the
Okay.
stand downs, for instance, we would play some of that music. All right, this is where our minds were. This is where
Mm.
our emotions were. And music drives emotion. Everybody knows that, or everybody should know that anyway. And it sparks certain things in the listener. And so I think Platoon was the start of that.
Mm,
And I began to realize, I mean, I was there, so I understood it, and but I didn't realize how important it might be to setting the atmosphere to the training schedule. But I did incorporate it later on.
Mm. Yeah, we find it really interesting with Platoon the movie when it comes out of the score. There's only a certain sequence where you have that popular music, but it is when the guys are having their downtime in the bunker with all the
Yeah.
drugs and stuff. And we think it's really well done because it doesn't overplay it. They're not going down a jungle path on a patrol to Fortunate Son because you wouldn't
No,
be listening to it there. We
no.
think there's a real different way of doing it in Platoon that makes
Yeah.
it almost better.
Yeah, I think so, because it emphasizes the escapist nature of it,
mm, mm,
and it separates it distinctly and consistently from what's going on in the jungle. Because, as you
Mm.
say, look, Flight of the Valkyries is wonderful every time you see a helicopter, but it never happened. It just didn't wasn't there.
Yeah, yeah. So a question from me: what's your favorite part of the movie? I know you worked on it, all of it, but when you rewatch it, what part stands out to you?
I think it's probably that brilliant performance by Dale Dye as Captain Harris.
Of
Absolutely.
course. Why
No,
not?
no. But it is. I think some of my favorite moments probably are in the final battle, because so much was going on there, and
Mm,
the look that we got at the enemy, the North Vietnamese army. These guys weren't clowns. They weren't cardboard cutouts, that disappears in pink
Yeah.
mist every time you fire a rifle at them. So I think probably um, that final battle, in my mind, wrapped it all up for me. Um, it showed me that what we were doing paid dividends, and the way it was staged and the absolute chaos that
Mm.
combat frequently is. Um, I think you see that in that final battle, and that always comes off as one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, it's such a
yeah.
well shot sequence, and I also really love to see the APCs rolling up at the end, because in most Vietnam media, you never see an APC roll up, and to see that in the movie, I was like, oh, like incredible, really. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I the thing about that final sequence is that sort of chaotic. Everything's going on at once. There's John C. McGinley's cowering in a hole, and then Sheen's character's inspiring. I've forgotten the name of the character, but the guy he's in the bunker with at the beginning of the battle, like
Yeah.
the look on his face when he sees Sheen run forward and retake the bunker after the RPG hits it. There's lots of really nice little moments that every time you like kind of rewatch that, well, the film in general, but when you rewatch that sequence, you spot little extra bits that they're kind of like layered in there, and there's always something to kind of like pick out in there, I think.
mm,
Yeah, I think, look, the thing that if there was something I carried away from my military experience personally, it is that combat reveals both the best and the worst of human nature, of human behavior.
mm,
Uh, and what I like most about the film, I think, is that insight that we are human beings and that put in extremis as we are when you're faced with combat. Um, there are some of us who rise to the occasion and become great heroes, great leaders, and there are others who fall from grace because of that pressure. And you see each and every one of those human traits, I think, in the film, and that's
mm.
what makes it, I think, above and beyond a great story and a great action vehicle. Um, it's a great human story.
Yeah, that has kind of answered one of my questions, which was why do you think it's endured so much? And I think that's probably one of the reasons.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so. Look, it's a great story of coming of age. It's a great story of good versus evil, almost biblical, and certainly literary in that approach. But what I think keeps it in the public mind is that each of us, man, woman, or child, that sees that film spots himself or a familiar reaction somewhere in the character. And I think that's part and parcel of its continuous audience appeal.
Mm, I think you're
yeah. I
right.
that begs the question: what are some other Vietnam films, perhaps not even ones that you've worked on, do you think kind of capture that authenticity or that or
Well, Hamburger
capture the
Hill is
war?
Hamburger Hill is certainly one.
Mm,
We were soldiers once. I have some quibbles with it, but I think that's a good human interest story.
mm.
Um, you know, I'm not sure we're through with Vietnam as a subject matter um, because it's so expansive and because
Mm.
it covers so much human terrain and historic terrain. Um, I don't know. In fact, I forgot what the hell the question was. What did you?
It was what are the Vietnam films you think captured the essence
Oh,
of the war,
there's a
basically?
few of them. The unfortunate part of that ledger, of that bookkeeping, is that too many of them take the low road. Too many of them, want to do the psycho vet uh, ticking time bomb, ticking time bomb trope, and that sort of thing.
Mm.
And those disgust me, frankly. And but they on the good side of the ledger, they inspire me to keep trying to get it right.
Mm. Yeah. Well, we
That
hope that the Michael Mann Quay series gets made eventually, maybe after
Yeah,
Heat
oh
boy,
yeah.
2.
geez,
You
I'd love
never
to do
know.
that.
Mm.
I'm not sure if I've got any more left in me. I just came home from 5 months in Australia, doing the new Tom Hanks Greyhound movie.
Oh wow.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be it's brilliant, by the way.
Okay.
Tom is just classic in that role as Captain Krause, the destroyer commander. This
Yes.
time he goes to the Pacific, and he was in the North Atlantic in
Okay.
the other one.
That's
Little bit of a
exciting.
FOF exclusive there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't know. I'm coming up on 82 now, and I'm not sure how much I've got left in me. So I'm hoping Michael Mann
Mm,
gets that Waste City
Yeah.
thing done, and
yeah,
if it could, that would be a great capstone because
it would be.
Way was my most brutal experience in Vietnam, and I
Mm,
was certainly there.
yeah.
So I'd love to see that done.
But sorry, Matt, I've got one more final question, if that's okay.
I've got one or two. I was just going to ask
Okay.
off the back of the previous question was famously the impetus for you wanting to be involved in the movie making business was, all of those war films that you felt that weren't, authentic or weren't very good. Can you remember any of the films that kind of drove you towards that and kind of inspired you to want to do the
You're
work that
asking
you've
me
done?
to listen. I think I've seen every military movie there is. Um, But the one that finally tripped the trigger for me, if let's see if I can remember it, it's called The Boys in Company C.
Yeah,
You've probably not seen it. I hope not, anyway. But
I
it
have
was.
seen it. Yeah.
Have you? Well,
Yeah.
well, good luck. Um, but that the whole war seemed to devolve into a soccer game.
Yeah.
You guys call it football, but a soccer game between, the Vietnamese and the Marines. And I said, that's just nonsense. And I've had it. And that's what tripped the trigger. And I just said, all right, I'm going to go.
Right.
They've screwed it up.
Okay.
I'm going to go out and unscrew it. So,
Yeah, it is an interesting one, that film. It starts off as one thing, ends up as another. It's quite an
yeah.
odd one. Um,
And interesting, it was the first film that Lee Ermey
that's right.
did. He's in there
Yeah.
as a drum instructor. Yeah.
Even he couldn't
Yeah.
save it.
No. So I was doing some digging around before we were talking to you today. How did the novelization of the movie come around? You ended up writing it. So do you asked on set or after the fact? Is it something that's in your contract?
No, it barely had a contract. Um, what happened was I think it caught us all flat-footed, the success of that
Mm,
film. And I'll talk about what that means in just a minute. But the way the book came about is I had written a couple of books and had them published. So I was a published author. Um, and they were pressing Oliver to write it. We got to get it out here while the platoon is hot and it's won Academy Awards
hmm
and everybody will buy the book. And Oliver just didn't have the time or patience for it. And I said, listen, I happen to be a published novelist. I happen to be a writer. And he'd seen some of the stuff I'd written before. So I said, well, can you do it? Can you do it in 3 weeks? And I said, yep, I can do it. And he said,
Wow.
well, are you sure? I said, no, I can do it. Just give it to me. I gave you your platoon. I will give you the book. And he said, okay. And so they signed a deal. Um, I got totally hosed on the deal in terms of money, that sort of thing. But I coughed it out in 3 weeks. And the thing is, I knew those characters and I knew that story intimately
Mm.
from the inside. So that made the insights provided in the book very popular with people. I think it spent a couple of weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. But
mm.
notice when you look at it, it's Oliver Stone's Platoon by this clown down here in this little print named Dale Dye. Oh, and I wanted to add to that. After the success of Platoon, and we won 4 Academy Awards and that sort of thing, Best Picture, Best Director for Oliver, um, we began this huge publicity swing. It went everywhere. We were on the Oprah Winfrey show, and Oliver wanted me there with him to help explain this sort of thing. Um, and what happened on the Oprah Winfrey show in Chicago? They salted the audience with Vietnam veterans, and I didn't know that, but Oprah, in her classic fashion, told us. after the cameras were rolling and everything, everybody out here listening to you is a Vietnam veteran. And I said, oh, here we go. But what happened was we found out from them, that from that audience, that Platoon had served to melt a sort of a personal ice that had formed over their experience. These were people who had been rejected or ignored when they came home from the war. So what happened was that they couldn't really talk about it. Nobody wanted to hear about it and that sort of thing. But they could go see Platoon and say, okay, that's why I don't want to talk about it. That's what. And I realized at that moment, and later on as the publicity swing continued, and I got more sense of veteran reaction, we did something that was socially significant for the American nation. We melted some ice that had formed over an entire generation of combat veterans. We gave them a magnifying glass that they could use for insight to say to their wives, or their families, or their kids, look, I don't want to get into the details of this, but if you see Platoon, you'll understand why. And what that meant to me, what I realized at that point, was that I had a tiger by the tail here. I could, if I did it right, I could influence education, I could influence social attitudes, I could influence all sorts of things with the popular media. And that was a huge lesson to me. And also, I felt a huge responsibility, I guess. And I've continued to feel that way throughout my career.
Yeah, that's the power of good cinema, isn't it? And I've heard it said about other films, warfare recently. I've heard that Global War on Terror veterans have said that that's a film that they point their families to. Like I some of that I've spoken to and Robbie have spoken to, they've said I can't watch it, but I've pointed family members to it and said that's probably a representation of. You might get some sort of idea of what we experienced.
Yeah.
My final question, and our final question from one of our patrons, is Craig Burgess asks, did you know when you were working on it that you were making a classic?
No, I didn't. In fact, I was praying that I would just get through this and not screw it up. Nobody was more shocked, really, than I was by the public reaction and by the reaction of show business itself, writ large, the Hollywood community, at how popular the film was, at how it was being dissected and diagnosed for all sorts of things. And I said, my God, I wish I'd have known. Actually, if I'd have known that we were making a classic, I'd have probably screwed it up. So I'm glad that we were unaware that in fact, we had less than $6 million to make the whole film.
Incredible.
And 54 days is all we had to shoot.
Yeah.
And there wasn't an inch of play, not an extra dime, not an extra dollar, and not an extra day. So we were really under pressure the whole time. And I suppose at the end of it, I knew we had done something worthy, something good, but I had no idea that it was going to be the monster that it was.
Thanks so much to Dale for coming on and talking about Platoon with us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. All that's left to say is if you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can. The links are in the bio of whatever podcast app you're using. Do join us again next week for more Fighting on Film. And all that's left to say is, Dale, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure.